Have you ever tried camping without a lighter in winter and thought, yeah, this was a bad idea? Now imagine doing that for 400,000 years. That's basically what the Neanderthals did. No matches, no gas stoves, no YouTube tutorials on how to start a fire with 2 rocks. Just endless cold, and somehow they survived. And that's the mystery that still baffles scientists today. How did Neanderthals make it through hundreds of Ice Age winters without reliable fire? Because here's the weird part, they knew fire existed. We found traces of ash, burnt bones, and even ancient hearths. But evidence shows they didn't use it all the time. Sometimes for thousands of years, they went without it. So how did they keep warm? Did they steal fire from nature whenever they could? Did their bodies just work differently? Or did they find clever ways to beat the cold that we've long forgotten? Tonight, we're heading back, way back, into a world of snow, mammoths, and survival. To meet the people who lived through the kind of winter no one should ever experience. Let's get something straight. The Neanderthals weren't dumb cavemen. They were tough, smart, and honestly, a bit underrated. These folks lived in Europe and parts of Asia long before us, from about 400,000 to 40,000 years ago. They hunted, built shelters, cared for their families, and even buried their dead. But when it came to fire, things get weird. See, Homo sapiens, that's us, learned how to make fire and keep it going almost anywhere. But Neanderthals? They seem to have used fire only when nature handed it to them. Like when lightning hit a tree or lava spilled from the ground, they'd grab what they could, keep it burning for a while, and when it went out, that was it. Imagine trying to keep your campfire alive for months because you don't know how to relight it. Talk about pressure. Archaeologists have been scratching their heads for decades. If they didn't always have fire, how did they cook? How did they sleep through the cold? How did they survive Ice Age nights that could kill an unprepared person in hours? Well, this video isn't just a quick Google summary. I've gone deep into the science on this one. From caves in France to bones in Siberia, from ancient climate records to modern experiments, we'll piece together how Neanderthals survived the impossible. And you might be surprised. Because they didn't just endure the cold, they mastered it. With strong bodies, smart survival instincts, and maybe even a few tricks we've lost over time. So tonight, grab your blanket, get comfortable, and let's step back 400,000 years. To a world where the only thing standing between life and death was the warmth you could make, the food you could find, and the people you could hold close. The world we're stepping into isn't a friendly one. It's cold. It's dark. And it's been that way for a long time. Picture this, endless plains covered in snow and ice. Glaciers crawl slowly across Europe, swallowing forests and mountains. The sun rises late and sets early, leaving long hours of night where temperatures drop low enough to freeze your eyelashes. This was the world of the Neanderthals. And somehow, they called it home. No warm houses. No heaters. Not even a proper campfire most of the time. Just caves, furs, and a whole lot of determination. When you think about it, it's kind of wild. We complain when the Wi-Fi drops for 10 seconds. These guys survived when the planet was trying to kill them. Now, the Neanderthals didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They evolved from an older group called Homo heidelbergensis, an early human species that wandered through Africa and Europe about 600,000 years ago. Over time, some of them drifted north into colder lands. The air got thinner, the winters harsher, and slowly, their bodies began to change to fit the world around them. They grew shorter and stockier, with wide chests and strong limbs, the perfect shape to keep warmth in and cold out. Their noses became big and broad, helping warm icy air before it reached their lungs. Basically, if evolution were a tailor, it gave Neanderthals a custom winter jacket. They were built for survival, and they'd need every bit of that toughness. Now, before we go too far, let's clear up one thing. Neanderthals weren't just grunting cave dwellers with clubs. That stereotype. Totally unfair. They were smart, social, and creative. They made tools, cared for the sick, and buried their dead, which means they had some sense of love, loss, and probably storytelling too. Imagine sitting in a dark cave, the wind screaming outside, while your clan tells stories about mammoths or spirits or the stars. If you think about it, that's probably how bedtime stories began. Still, even with all their smarts, the biggest mystery remains. How on earth did they survive the cold without reliable fire? Because here's the thing, scientists know they used fire sometimes. We found burnt bones, charcoal, and ash in their camps. But it doesn't show up everywhere. In some sites, there's zero evidence of fire use, even during brutally cold periods. That's like finding a ski lodge without a fireplace. It just doesn't make sense. So how did they do it? Well, maybe the answer lies in how they lived, not what they lacked. First, let's talk about shelter. Neanderthals loved caves, nature's free housing. Caves protected them from wind, snow, and hungry predators. And because rock holds heat, it helped keep things a bit warmer inside. In open areas, they sometimes built windbreaks out of wood, bones, or even mammoth tusks. Picture that, a house made of giant bones. It's kind of metal, but also kind of genius. Then there were furs. Neanderthals hunted large animals like reindeer, bison, and woolly rhinoceros, not just for food, but for clothing and bedding too. They didn't have needles, but they used scrapers to clean hides and wrap them tightly around their bodies. Basically, they turned into human burritos. Warm, fuzzy, ice-age burritos. But warmth wasn't just about gear, it was about teamwork. Neanderthals lived in small groups, often families. And when nights got brutally cold, they'd huddle together. Body heat, even without fire, can make a huge difference. Think about it. One person alone loses heat fast, but a cluster of bodies sleeping close can stay surprisingly warm. They were probably experts in that. Survival by togetherness. It's oddly comforting to imagine a family curled up under furs, listening to the storm outside, safe in the rhythm of their breathing. No glowing screens, no noise, just the sound of survival. Now, some scientists believe Neanderthals didn't need as much external heat as we do. Their thick bones, muscular builds, and heavy diets might have worked like a natural furnace. They ate loads of fat and meat, burning calories constantly to stay warm. Kind of like a human-sized space heater. Their metabolism may have been faster than ours, turning food into body heat with incredible efficiency. So while we reach for a sweater at 15 degrees, they were probably fine in a blizzard. Still, even the toughest body needs help. And when they did get fire, it must have felt like magic. Picture it, lightning strikes a tree on the plains. The fire burns for days. A group of Neanderthals approaches carefully, maybe frightened but curious. They grab burning branches, bring them back to their camp, and guard them like treasure. That fire might have lasted weeks, even months, if they kept feeding it. But when it finally died out, that was it. No fire starters. No redo. They had to wait for the next lightning storm. It's like your phone dying with no charger for miles, except instead of boredom, the risk was freezing to death. This fragile relationship with fire might explain a lot about their mindset. To us, fire is routine. We flip a switch, press a lighter, done. For them, it was sacred, rare, and dangerous. It was warmth, light, and safety all in one, but it was also unpredictable. So, they learned to survive both with it and without it. That's what makes them so fascinating. They weren't helpless, they adapted. When nature gave them fire, they used it. When it didn't, they found another way. In the end, the Neanderthals' greatest skill might not have been tool-making or hunting, it was endurance. Pure, stubborn, cold-weather endurance. They didn't have technology, but they had each other. They didn't control fire, but they controlled how they lived. And that's probably why they lasted for over 300,000 years, longer than modern humans have existed so far. Think about that next time your heating bill comes in. So, as we leave this first glimpse into their frozen world, remember, Neanderthals weren't primitive. They were practical. They didn't conquer nature, they worked with it. And somewhere in that frozen silence, surrounded by snow and stars, they found a way to keep the cold at bay, even without a flame. Next, in Chapter 2, we'll follow their story back to the beginning, to see how these Ice Age survivors first appeared, and what their earliest ancestors faced when they stepped into the cold. Let's rewind. Way before the cold winds of Europe, before the glaciers, before the mammoths, there was Africa. Warm, green, and full of early humans figuring out life one stone at a time. One of those ancient humans was Homo heidelbergensis, kind of like the great-grandparent of both us and the Neanderthals. These folks were taller and leaner than Neanderthals, and they had something that made all the difference: curiosity. Some stayed in Africa and eventually became us, Homo sapiens. But others, they wandered north, chasing herds and new horizons. They had no idea that journey would turn them into something entirely new, something built for the cold. That's where the Neanderthals' story really begins. As these wanderers reached Europe, they were greeted by a world that was nothing like home. Gone were the wide savannas and warm breezes. Instead, they found dark forests, snow, and long winters where the sun sometimes forgot to rise. Imagine that first winter. You've just traveled hundreds of miles from warm, sunny Africa, and suddenly, bam! You're in a place where your breath turns into fog, and everything you touch feels like ice. Most animals would have gone extinct right there. But these early humans adapted. Generation by generation, they changed. Their bodies, their habits, their tools, everything evolved to match the frozen land around them. That's how Homo heidelbergensis slowly became Homo neanderthalensis. It didn't happen overnight, more like over a few 100,000 nights. But nature's patient, and it was sculpting the ultimate Ice Age survivor. Let's talk about what that new human looked like. If a modern human walked into your room, you'd probably just say hi. If a Neanderthal walked in, you'd definitely do a double take. They were shorter, maybe around 5.5 feet tall, but built like tanks. Broad shoulders, thick arms, barrel-shaped chests, and strong legs. Basically, the human version of a powerlifter. Their skulls were different too, long and low with heavy brows and wide noses. Their faces jutted forward a bit, and their jaws were strong enough to crush bone. If evolution had a rugged setting, Neanderthals were on max mode. And that big nose. It wasn't just for looks. It helped warm up the freezing air before it hit their lungs, nature's built-in heater. Even their skin likely changed. Living under dim, cold skies meant less sunlight, so over generations, they developed lighter skin tones to absorb more vitamin D. Everything about them was shaped by survival. Now, here's where things get cool and kind of human. Even though Neanderthals looked different, they weren't just walking muscles. They were thinkers, planners, and family people. They made tools, sharp stone flakes, scrapers, and spear tips, carefully crafted with skill and patience. Some tools were so well designed that modern archaeologists can't help but be impressed. And they weren't mindless hunters, either. They understood animals, the seasons, and how to move with the herds. In fact, they were probably among the best trackers in human history. When you spend your whole life surrounded by snow, you learn to notice every detail. A footprint, a snapped twig, a faint smell. It's like nature trained them to be survival experts. But life wasn't all hunting and surviving. There was tenderness too. Fossil evidence shows Neanderthals cared for their injured and elderly. Some skeletons show healed broken bones, injuries that would have killed them if others hadn't helped. That means they fed each other, protected each other, and had compassion. In one cave, scientists found the remains of an older Neanderthal who had lost most of his teeth but lived for years after. Someone had to chew food for him or bring him softer meals. Think about that. Even in the Ice Age, someone still cared enough to make sure Grandpa ate dinner. That's not just survival. That's love. They also had culture. Simple, maybe, but real. They decorated things with pigments, wore animal claws or shells as ornaments, and possibly even buried their dead with care. When archaeologists find bones deliberately placed or covered with flowers, it suggests emotion, mourning, respect, memory. They weren't just surviving, they were living. And they had feelings deeper than we once thought. But back to that first arrival. The Neanderthals' European home was a roller coaster of climates. One century could be mild, the next an ice storm lasting generations. They had to move, adapt, and improvise constantly. That's why we find their remains scattered all across the continent, from Spain to Russia, from the Middle East to Britain. They followed rivers, hunted migrating herds, and set up temporary camps wherever they could. Some caves still show traces of their time: stone flakes, animal bones, a single blackened patch of ash. Small signs of huge stories. Now, here's a fun fact. The first Neanderthal bones ever discovered, back in 1856 in Germany's Neanderthal Valley, completely shocked scientists. People didn't even believe in evolution yet. So when they saw those thick bones and strange skulls, they thought they'd found a weird caveman or some kind of ancient monster. It took decades before we realized, nope, that was us. Just an older, tougher version. In fact, Neanderthals and modern humans shared about 99.7% of the same DNA. That's closer than most people realize. And for a while, spoiler alert, we even lived side by side. But that's a story for later. So, to sum it up, the Neanderthals weren't an accident. They were nature's answer to a challenge. Can humans survive the Ice Age? And for hundreds of thousands of years, they proved the answer was yes. They built families, adapted to freezing lands, and became masters of cold survival. They weren't lost wanderers, they were pioneers. The first true Europeans. When we look back at those first arrivals, it's hard not to feel a little proud. They didn't have fire, language like ours, or any fancy tools. But they had the one thing that's kept our species alive since the beginning: grit. They walked into the cold, and stayed. And somehow, through their strength, their courage, and their cleverness, we're here today to tell their story. In the next chapter, we'll explore what their world actually looked like. The forests, the glaciers, and the strange creatures they shared it with. Because to understand how they lived, we first need to understand the frozen continent they called home. Picture this. You step outside your cave one morning, stretch your arms, and take a deep breath. And immediately regret it because the air feels like it's trying to stab your lungs. Welcome to Ice Age Europe. This wasn't your normal BRR, it's a bit chilly kind of cold. No, this was epic cold. The kind of cold that made trees crack, rivers freeze solid, and mammoths grow extra fluff just to cope. When the Neanderthals first arrived, Europe was basically split between two moods: frozen wasteland and barely thawed tundra. Glaciers stretched down from the north like giant, icy blankets, covering much of what's now Britain, Germany, and Scandinavia. If Google Maps existed back then, half of it would just say, unavailable due to ice. But here's the thing. Even though it was brutally cold, it wasn't empty. Europe during the Ice Age was alive, just in a hardcore way. Massive herds of woolly mammoths, rhinos, and bison wandered the plains. Reindeer and horses galloped across frozen steppes. And somewhere in the distance, a saber-toothed cat probably yawned, wondering which unlucky creature would be lunch. Neanderthals weren't the only survivors here. They were just one part of a massive, frozen ecosystem. Now, let's set the scene. Imagine endless grasslands stretching to the horizon, dotted with scraggly bushes and the occasional lonely pine. The ground was hard, the wind constant, and the snow came down sideways more often than not. If you were looking for paradise, you took a wrong turn somewhere near Africa. But for the Neanderthals, this was home. They knew where to find shelter, deep limestone caves carved by rivers long ago. They built camps near valleys where animals crossed, using the land's natural shape to block the worst of the wind. Some caves still carry the marks of their time there: blackened soot on ceilings, flint shards scattered in the dirt, even fingerprints pressed into ancient clay. Think of it like the world's oldest Airbnb reviews. Now, depending on when exactly you lived as a Neanderthal, your Europe might have looked a little different. The Ice Age wasn't one giant block of frozen time. It came and went in waves. Warm periods, called interglacials, gave them forests and rivers. Cold periods turned everything back into an Arctic desert. So imagine this constant cycle. Warm for a few thousand years. Trees grow, animals return, life gets good. Then, bam! Glaciers move south again, and suddenly you're back to eating frozen mammoth stew. Talk about unpredictable weather. If you think modern humans complain about climate change, imagine being a Neanderthal trying to plan a hunting trip that lasts several generations. But this ever-changing world forced them to adapt fast. During warmer times, Neanderthals lived in open forests filled with red deer, bears, and wild boars. They hunted with wooden spears, probably worked together in small groups, and cooked what they could, when they had fire, that is. When the cold came back, those forests vanished, replaced by icy plains. So they moved again, following herds of woolly beasts into the tundra. Migration wasn't a choice, it was survival. The Neanderthals basically became Europe's first nomads, chasing food across a land that refused to stay still. And man, the animals they shared that land with were something else. You had woolly mammoths, the giants of the north, standing over 10 feet tall with tusks curved like giant swords. Then there were woolly rhinos, yes, rhinos, covered in fur, built like tanks. Bison were everywhere, so were reindeer and horses. There were even hyenas, not the laughing kind you see in movies, but massive Ice Age versions that could tear through bone. And then the predators, cave lions, saber-toothed cats, and giant bears. If you were a Neanderthal walking around at night, you definitely looked over your shoulder a lot. Life here wasn't peaceful, it was balanced on the edge of survival. Every animal, every human, every plant fought for its place. But let's not imagine Neanderthals as cold, miserable cave dwellers shivering in the dark. They thrived in this world. They knew every trail, every rock, every trick the land had to offer. They built shelters from branches, bones, and hides. Some camps even had rings of mammoth bones, not for decoration, but for wind protection. When you're living in -20 degrees, even a wall of ribs starts looking like great architecture. And while they might not have had Netflix, they definitely had fire, at least sometimes. We'll get deeper into that later, but imagine a small flame flickering in the dark, surrounded by tired hunters warming their hands, sharing food, maybe even a few laughs. That little fire meant everything: warmth, safety, light, and maybe a moment of peace in a harsh world. Now, one thing that always blows people's minds is that Europe wasn't completely frozen all the time. Even in the coldest eras, there were pockets of warmth, valleys shielded by mountains, rivers that never froze, and coasts where sea breezes softened the chill. Those were the Neanderthals' secret spots, their safe zones. When the world got too icy, they'd retreat there, wait things out, and move again when the glaciers pulled back. It's kind of like having a summer home, except your vacation meant not freezing to death. You can almost picture it. A group of Neanderthals walking through knee-deep snow, carrying spears and hides. The wind howls, snow crunches under their feet, and in the distance, a herd of mammoths trudges across the horizon. One of them stops, squints at the sky, maybe wondering if the sun will ever come back. Then they keep walking, because stopping wasn't an option. That's the world they lived in. Harsh, beautiful, and always changing. Europe during the Ice Age wasn't just a place, it was a test. And for hundreds of thousands of years, the Neanderthals passed that test again and again. They didn't conquer the land, they learned from it. They didn't fight the cold, they became part of it. They adapted so well that for a time, they were the true kings and queens of Europe. In the next chapter, we'll explore how they actually lived in this frozen world, what they ate, how they hunted, and how they managed to stay alive when almost everything around them wanted them dead. Because surviving in Ice Age Europe wasn't just about strength. It was about cleverness, teamwork, and sometimes pure luck. If you think choosing what to eat for dinner is hard, imagine being a Neanderthal. There's no grocery store, no just order pizza option, and if you get hungry, well, it's time to grab a spear. Because in the Ice Age, you were the hunter, and sometimes the hunted. Let's be real, surviving in Ice Age Europe wasn't about fine dining. There were no salads, no desserts, no vegan options. Your meal plan depended on one thing: whatever you could catch before it caught you. Neanderthals were meat lovers, through and through. Not because they hated plants, but because, let's face it, plants didn't really grow well when the ground was frozen solid 9 months a year. You can't exactly harvest berries when everything's under a blanket of ice. So, they hunted. A lot. Now, here's the wild part. Neanderthals weren't just scavengers picking at leftovers from bigger predators. They were apex hunters. That means they were at the very top of the food chain, and they earned that spot with skill, strength, and teamwork. Picture a group of them crouched low in the tall grass, snow crunching softly under their feet. In the distance, a herd of mammoths moves slowly, huge, hairy mountains of muscle and tusks. The Neanderthals wait for the perfect moment, then move as one. No guns, no bows, just wooden spears, sharp stone tips, and guts of steel. It's crazy to think about, but fossil evidence shows that Neanderthals regularly hunted animals bigger than elephants. We found mammoth bones with spear marks, bison with broken ribs, and even woolly rhinoceroses that clearly lost a fight. So yeah, these folks didn't play around. But mammoths and rhinos weren't exactly everyday meals. Those hunts were dangerous, often deadly, and probably more of a once-in-a-while feast. Most of the time, Neanderthals went for medium-sized prey: deer, wild horses, reindeer, maybe a wild boar or two. Their hunting style was simple but smart. They used ambush tactics, hiding near animal paths or waiting near cliffs where they could trap or drive animals off edges. Some researchers think they even used natural fire or noise to herd animals into tight spots. And when they caught something, oh, nothing went to waste. They ate the meat, of course, raw if they didn't have fire, cooked if they did. They used bones for tools, tendons for string, hides for clothing, and fat for light. Even the marrow inside bones was sucked out, pure energy, perfect for surviving long, frozen nights. You could say they were the ultimate recyclers. And while most of their diet was meat, they weren't total carnivores. We found evidence of plants stuck in their teeth, roots, nuts, seeds, even a few medicinal herbs. They weren't farming, but they knew what to eat and what not to. If you're living in the wild for hundreds of thousands of years, trial and error teaches you a lot about food safety. One bite of the wrong mushroom probably cleared that lesson up real quick. Now, hunting wasn't just about food, it was life itself. It decided where they lived, how they worked together, and even how they thought. A big hunt needed teamwork. Some Neanderthals scared animals toward others hiding in ambush. Others finished the job with close-range strikes. Everyone had a role, and everyone depended on each other. If one person failed, the group went hungry. If one person got hurt, that could be the end of the whole hunt. This constant cooperation might be one of the reasons Neanderthals developed strong family and social bonds. Archaeologists have found signs that they cared for their injured and buried their dead, suggesting a level of compassion that's honestly kind of heartwarming. Imagine a small group sitting around the remains of a fire, passing bits of roasted meat, sharing warmth under furs. That was their version of dinner with family. And speaking of roasting, when they did have fire, cooking made a huge difference. It made meat easier to chew, killed bacteria, and unlocked extra calories. Basically, it was prehistoric meal prep. But remember, fire wasn't always guaranteed. Sometimes they had to eat things raw, which sounds terrible to us, but their strong stomachs and powerful jaws handled it just fine. Neanderthals were built tough. Still, even for them, a hot meal must have felt like heaven after days in the cold. Now, let's talk about what they ate, because it wasn't all mammoth steaks. When big hunts failed, which they often did, Neanderthals had a plan B. They turned to smaller animals: rabbits, birds, fish, even turtles and shellfish near coasts. In some caves, scientists found piles of cracked shells and burned fish bones, evidence that they weren't just land hunters, they were coastal foragers too. They probably even used basic traps and snares, though those wouldn't survive long enough for us to find. So yeah, while they didn't have spearfishing gear or fishing rods, they were pretty resourceful. If it had calories, it was dinner. And sometimes, dinner meant leftovers from something else's kill. Neanderthals likely scavenged when they had to, stealing from lions or hyenas if the opportunity came up. That's risky business, but hey, free food is free food. Even today, most of us wouldn't turn down a free meal, though we usually don't have to fight a saber-toothed cat for it. It's strange, isn't it? We tend to picture Neanderthals as these clumsy, hairy brutes gnawing on bones. But the truth is, they were excellent survivalists, expert hunters who understood the land better than anyone else. They balanced strength with intelligence, courage with cooperation. Every meal was earned, not given. And that kind of lifestyle shapes you, physically and mentally. It builds resilience. It makes you appreciate every bit of warmth, every bite of food, every breath of life. So when we think about how they survived 400,000 winters without reliable fire, it wasn't just about warmth. It was about how they lived, constantly moving, constantly adapting, constantly fighting to stay alive. They didn't just endure the Ice Age, they thrived in it. Their diet, their teamwork, their toughness, it all played a part. Next, we'll step even deeper into their daily lives, how they made clothes, built shelters, and kept their families safe from the endless cold. Because surviving the Ice Age wasn't just about food or fire. It was about building a life in a world that wanted to freeze you solid. If you've ever tried to sleep in a cold room without a blanket, you already know, warmth is everything. Now imagine trying to sleep in a cave, during the Ice Age, with temperatures dropping below freezing, and no central heating. That was daily life for the Neanderthals. No fireplaces, no electric heaters, and sometimes, no fire at all. Just you, your group, and the howling wind outside. So, how did they stay warm? Well, the Neanderthals didn't just survive the cold, they built clever, cozy homes to beat it. Let's start with the basics. Caves were the Neanderthals' real estate of choice. They weren't just random holes in cliffs, they were carefully chosen shelters. Deep enough to block the wind, high enough to avoid floods, and often facing south to catch the little sunlight there was. That's right, even 100,000 years ago, they understood good lighting. Some caves even show signs of zoning, certain areas used for sleeping, others for toolmaking, and the best spots, near the entrance, for cooking or processing animals. Basically, early open-concept living. But not every Neanderthal lived in a cave. Many groups built temporary shelters out in the open, especially during migrations or hunts. Archaeologists have found circular stone arrangements, post holes, and even traces of mammoth bones shaped into frameworks. These weren't random piles of junk, they were Ice Age houses. Picture this. A big ring of mammoth bones for walls, covered with animal hides, sealed with mud or snow for insulation. A small entrance facing away from the wind, and inside, furs spread on the ground to keep the cold out. Not bad for a species that didn't have blueprints. It's basically the prehistoric version of glamping, minus the Wi-Fi, of course. Now, the real challenge wasn't just building a home, it was keeping it warm. And this is where Neanderthals showed some true genius. First, they used the earth itself. Caves, pits, and natural hollows all trapped warmer air. Even during the coldest nights, underground spots stayed several degrees higher than outside. That might not sound like much, but in Ice Age conditions, those few degrees could mean the difference between life and death. Some groups even dug shallow pits into cave floors or ground shelters, like built-in insulation. You could think of it as the first underfloor heating system, minus the heat. Then there was body heat. And no, this isn't a romantic story, it's just physics. Neanderthals had thick, muscular bodies, wide chests, and shorter limbs. Basically, their build was perfect for conserving heat. Less surface area means less heat loss, like a natural winter jacket. And when you packed several of them into a small shelter, instant space heater. If you've ever shared a tent with too many people, you know how warm it gets in there. So yeah, cuddling wasn't just cute, it was survival. They also made good use of furs and hides. We don't have their actual clothes, but we found tools, stone scrapers and bone awls, that were clearly used to clean and soften hides. Some scientists think Neanderthals were tailored garments made from animal skins, sewn together with sinew or plant fibers. So while they might not have had fashion weeks, they definitely understood the power of layering. Call it Ice Age couture. Thick furs for the cold, lighter ones for milder days, and probably some serious mammoth leather boots. You can almost picture them stepping out of their shelters like, yeah, it's -30, but check out this fresh bison coat. Now, even without fire, they found clever ways to trap heat. Some shelters had animal hides stretched tightly over openings, acting like primitive doors. Others had walls built with moss, branches, or even packed snow. Snow, surprisingly, makes great insulation. Just ask any igloo. By layering materials, blocking drafts, and choosing smart locations, Neanderthals managed to keep their shelters livable, even when the world outside froze solid. It wasn't cozy like a modern home, but it was enough. But here's something cool. In a few sites, like Moldova in Ukraine, archaeologists found full-blown mammoth bone huts. Massive circular structures with walls built from tusks, skulls, and ribs, all arranged with incredible precision. We're talking about shelters up to 5 meters wide. That's the size of a modern living room. Inside, there were signs of fire use, animal bones, and stone tools. This wasn't just a camp, it was a home. Imagine the amount of effort it took to build that. They had to hunt mammoths, move heavy bones, and assemble the whole thing without cranes, nails, or thumbs as dexterous as ours. It's honestly mind-blowing. Now, did they always live like this? Not exactly. Just like the climate changed, so did their lifestyle. In warmer periods, they built lighter shelters, open camps near rivers, maybe covered with branches and grass. When the cold returned, they dug in deep, literally. You could say the Neanderthals were the original van lifers, always moving, always adapting, always finding a way to stay comfortable no matter where they ended up. And while we often picture them as silent, serious people, you've got to imagine there were moments of warmth, and not just physical warmth. A group huddled together inside a dark cave, listening to the wind outside, maybe telling stories or humming softly. Kids playing with bones, adults fixing hides, someone sharpening a spear by dim firelight. These small moments, laughter, comfort, togetherness, are what really kept them alive. Because shelter wasn't just about protection from the cold. It was about creating a space that felt safe, a small bubble of humanity in a brutal world. Even without fire, that mattered more than anything. So, how did Neanderthals stay warm through endless winters without reliable fire? They used everything around them, the land, their bodies, their intelligence, and each other. They turned caves into homes, bones into walls, hides into blankets. They didn't need fancy tools or technology, just instinct, teamwork, and determination. Their shelters were more than structures. They were symbols of survival, Proof that even in the harshest world imaginable, warmth can be found if you know where to look. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into the tools and technology that made Neanderthal life possible. From stone tools sharper than razors to mysterious objects that might have been art, we'll see just how clever these early humans really were. Because surviving the Ice Age wasn't just about strength, it was about creativity. If you give a modern human a rock, they'll probably just look at it and say, "Cool rock." If you gave that same rock to a Neanderthal, they'd turn it into a knife, a hammer, or a hunting weapon before you even finished your sentence. Because for the Neanderthals, tools weren't just things they used. They were extensions of who they were. Every cut, every shape, every spark off the stone was a piece of their world. Now, when we think about prehistoric tools, most people picture simple chunks of rock. Rough, clumsy, not very impressive. But Neanderthal tools? Oh no, these were something else. They were smart, efficient, and honestly kind of beautiful in their own rugged way. Archaeologists call their tool-making style the Mousterian tradition, named after a site in France called Le Moustier. It's a fancy word, but the idea behind it is simple. Take a piece of stone and shape it so you can get exactly the kind of tool you need. Want to scrape hides? You shape a flake with a rounded edge. Need to cut meat or wood? You sharpen a blade-like flake. Planning to hunt a mammoth? Time to attach a sharp point to a wooden spear. Every tool had a purpose. Nothing was random. Let's imagine a scene. A Neanderthal sits near the entrance of a cave, daylight spilling in through the opening. In their hands, a chunk of flint. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoes softly as flakes of stone fall away, each one deliberate. They turn the piece in their hand, study the edge, and chip away again. Tap, tap. Soon, a sharp flake gleams in the light. No machines, no blueprints, no how-to videos, just instinct, practice, and patience. And here's the crazy part. These tools were so well made that modern archaeologists have studied them for decades trying to understand how they pulled it off. Because it wasn't just random bashing, it was technique. They used a method called the Levallois technique, which sounds complicated but is basically prehistoric planning. They'd shape a rock core so that one perfect flake could be struck off, a ready-made knife, created with just one hit. That's like carving an apple so you get a perfect slice every time. And they didn't just make tools, they used them for everything. Cutting meat, scraping hides, carving wood, even making other tools. Some edges are worn smooth from hours of work, showing that these weren't disposable, they were treasured. If something broke, they'd repair it. If it got dull, they'd resharpen it. Even the tiniest flakes were kept for use. Talk about efficient. You can almost imagine a Neanderthal version of a toolbox, except instead of wrenches and screwdrivers, it's full of sharpened flint and bone. Now, it wasn't all stone. They also worked with wood, bone, and antler, though those materials don't survive as well. A few wooden spears have been found, like the famous Skåningen spears from Germany. They're over 300,000 years old and still straight, balanced, and perfectly shaped for throwing. That's older than our species, and they still look functional. If that doesn't impress you, nothing will. These spears tell us a lot. They weren't just stabbing tools, they were aerodynamic, balanced, and carefully made. That means the Neanderthals understood physics long before anyone knew what the word meant. And when it came to hunting, their toolkit was deadly. Stone-tipped spears for close range, hand axes for butchering, scrapers for cleaning hides. Everything had a place and a purpose. Imagine preparing for a hunt. One group sharpens spears, another ties points with sinew, someone else gathers wood for handles. No metal, no rope, no glue, just stone, bone, and brainpower. It's teamwork at its finest. And when the hunt was done, those same tools turned into kitchen utensils, cutting meat, cleaning bones, scraping hides. The whole process was a cycle of craft and survival. But maybe the coolest thing about Neanderthal tools is that they also give us a glimpse into their minds. Tool-making isn't just hitting rocks together, it's thinking ahead. You need to visualize what you want before you make it. You need memory, focus, and creativity. Every strike had to be just right, or the whole piece could break. That means Neanderthals weren't just copying what they saw, they were thinking, planning, and learning from experience. In other words, they had real intelligence. And get this, they might have had a touch of art, too. In a few caves, archaeologists have found pieces of ochre, red and yellow minerals that can be used as pigments. Some were ground into powder, maybe for body paint or decoration. Others were used to color tools or shells. We've even found eagle talons with cut marks, possibly worn as jewelry. If that's true, it means Neanderthals weren't just surviving, they were expressing themselves. They understood beauty, even in a harsh world. Who says Ice Age fashion wasn't a thing? Now, of course, not every group made the same stuff. Tools varied from region to region. What you made depended on the rocks nearby, the animals you hunted, and the weather you faced. In some areas, tools were finely crafted and symmetrical. In others, rough but practical. That kind of variation tells us something huge. Neanderthals shared ideas. They probably learned from each other, passed down techniques, maybe even traded tips when groups met. Imagine two clans bumping into each other on the steppe, showing off their newest tools like, "Hey, check out this edge. Cuts mammoth hide like butter." Communication, sharing, collaboration, that's how cultures are born. Every tool they made, every edge they sharpened, was a small act of hope. Because each one said, "I'll hunt again tomorrow. I'll build again. I'll keep surviving." Their world was cold, dangerous, and uncertain. But these tools, these humble stones and spears, gave them control. A sense that even when nature turned brutal, they could fight back. That's what made the Neanderthals so extraordinary. They didn't just live in the Ice Age. They shaped it with their own hands. So next time you see a simple stone tool behind glass in a museum, remember this. That little piece of flint was once part of someone's story. A story of patience, survival, and the oldest kind of creativity. The kind born not from comfort, but from necessity. Because for the Neanderthals, every spark of stone was a spark of life. Next, we'll explore something truly fascinating. How they communicated. Did they have language like us? Did they sing, tell stories, or teach their young through words? In the next chapter, we'll dive into the sounds, gestures, and maybe even the music of the Neanderthals. The voices that echoed through Ice Age valleys long before history began. Close your eyes for a second and imagine this. A Neanderthal group huddled around a small fire or inside a cozy cave. The wind howls outside. Snow crunches underfoot. Inside, someone gestures, grunts, points at the horizon, maybe mimicking a mammoth moving through the valley. But what if they could do more than grunts? What if they could talk? That's the big question. Did Neanderthals have language like ours? And if they did, what did it sound like? Let's start with their bodies. Humans can talk because of a few key features: the vocal cords, tongue, lips, and a bone called the hyoid. Neanderthals had most of those same features. Their hyoid bones were shaped remarkably like ours, suggesting their voices could produce a range of sounds. They had the anatomy to speak. So anatomically, yes, they could make language. But language isn't just making sounds, it's thinking about meaning. It's combining sounds into words, words into sentences, sentences into stories. Could Neanderthals do that? Some clues come from their lives. They planned hunts, made tools, cared for the injured, all complex behaviors that suggest communication. Think about it. If you're chasing a woolly rhinoceros across icy plains, you need more than pointing and grunting. You need coordination. You need signals. You might not need Shakespeare, but you do need a way to say, "Hey, left side. No. Wait. Stop." Then there's culture. Neanderthals used pigments, wore jewelry, and possibly buried their dead. These aren't random actions. They suggest shared understanding. If you decorate yourself with a claw or a shell, someone else in the group has to recognize its meaning. That's a kind of symbolic communication, the precursor to language. Some scientists even argue that their gestures and body language could have carried a lot of information. Maybe a wave of the arm meant danger, or a stomp meant come here. Add vocalizations, and suddenly you have a system that's starting to look like language. There's also the genetic side. A gene called FOXP2 is associated with speech in humans. Guess what? Neanderthals had it too. This tiny little gene difference might be one reason humans can form complex sentences today. Neanderthals having it suggests they could form structured vocal sounds, maybe even words. So if they had the anatomy, the gene, and the social need for communication, why do we still debate it? Well, talking about the past is tricky. We don't have recordings. We don't have written letters or diaries. All we have are bones, tools, and traces in caves. That leaves a lot to interpretation. Some scientists say they had full-fledged speech. Others argue they only had simple vocalizations, like early grunts and calls, combined with gestures. The truth? Probably somewhere in the middle. And here's a fun thought. Even if they didn't have words like us, they might have had songs. Yes, songs. Some Neanderthal sites have evidence of musical instruments, tiny flutes made from bird bones. Other sites show repetitive patterns in stones or shells, which might have been rhythmic or symbolic. Imagine a Neanderthal group gathered around a cave wall, tapping stones in rhythm. Maybe a call and response between hunters, or a simple tune to pass the time during long winters. Not exactly pop music, but definitely music. Music and language share roots, patterns, repetition, signaling. So even if they weren't talking in full sentences, they were likely sharing ideas, emotions, and experiences. Think about raising a child in the Ice Age. You can't just say, "Be careful with that mammoth tusk," in modern English. But you have to teach them how to hunt, what plants are safe, how to track animals, how to react to predators. That requires communication. Even if it was gestures, grunts, or simple words, the kids had to understand and respond. Teaching was probably a huge driver for the evolution of Neanderthal communication. And there's one more clue: their social life. Neanderthals cared for each other. They shared food, healed injuries, and buried their dead. To do that, you need to communicate intentions, empathy, and knowledge. If I'm tending to your broken leg, I need to tell you, don't move. Hold this. I'm going to help you. You can't do that with just grunts. Some kind of structured communication had to exist. Now, let's imagine what it might have sounded like. Probably not Shakespeare, not full sentences with adjectives and metaphors. More like a mix of sounds, gestures, and maybe a few words, simple, direct, and effective. A warning call, mammoth. A direction, left. A reassurance, it's okay. Add some hand signals, maybe a tap on a bone or a patterned clack on the cave floor, and you've got a rich system of communication. Not unlike some human languages today that mix words, gestures, and sounds. Even without words, Neanderthals shared stories. Not on paper, not in books, but in actions, in tools, in art, and in how they lived together. Every hunt, every decoration, every burial was a story told without words. So maybe the question isn't if they had language. Maybe it's, what counts as language? If passing knowledge, emotions, and culture counts, then yes, Neanderthals were talking. So next time you imagine a Neanderthal, picture them not as a mute brute, but as someone with a voice. A voice that warned, taught, laughed, sang, and mourned. Because even in a frozen world, communication was as essential as fire, food, or shelter. It was survival. And in the next chapter, we'll dive into something truly fascinating. How Neanderthals used fire when they had it, and how they survived when they didn't. Because fire wasn't just warmth, it was life, community, and maybe even storytelling itself. If you've ever tried to start a campfire in the rain, you already know the frustration. Now imagine trying to do it in the Ice Age, in freezing snow, with no matches, no lighters, and only stones and sticks. That was the reality for the Neanderthals. And yet, somehow, they survived 400,000 winters. Sometimes with fire, sometimes without it. So how did they do it? Let's find out. First, let's be honest. Fire was everything. A small flame could warm your hands, cook your food, ward off predators, and even light up the dark inside a cave. But starting fire wasn't easy. You couldn't just rub sticks together and hope for sparks. Well, sometimes you could, but it was unreliable. So early humans had to get creative. Neanderthals were clever about it. Evidence suggests they could use natural fire, lightning strikes, wildfires, even lava flows, and carry embers from one camp to the next. A tiny glowing ember wrapped in moss could be the difference between a cold, miserable night and a semi-cozy evening. Think of it as the prehistoric equivalent of taking your phone charger with you. It's small, but it matters a lot. When they had fire, they weren't just sitting around like a campfire Instagram reel. They cooked meat, making it easier to chew, digest, and gain calories. They boiled water in heated rocks. Evidence of early cooking techniques suggests they might have even boiled plants or tubers. And they used smoke to keep insects away. Fire wasn't just warmth. It was survival. But here's the twist. For much of the Ice Age, fire wasn't guaranteed. Scientists have found Neanderthal camps with no evidence of fire at all. That means they survived long winters, sometimes completely cold. So how? First, shelter was everything. As we saw before, caves, bone huts, and thick hides blocked wind and trapped what little heat they could generate. Even without fire, these shelters could stay several degrees warmer than the outside world. Then, there was their clothing. Thick furs, hides, and layered garments made from mammoths, reindeer, and other animals acted as natural insulation. When it's -30 outside, a well-layered coat of fur is basically wearable heating. And let's not forget their bodies. Neanderthals were short, stocky, and muscular, a build perfect for conserving heat. Less surface area, more bulk, more warmth. Plus, living in the cold 24/7 made their metabolisms efficient. Basically, their bodies ran like little furnaces. Pack a group of these humans together in a cave, and you've got a natural human radiator. But even with all that, fire was life-changing. Some sites show evidence of carefully built hearths, circular arrangements of stones with blackened ash in the middle. Sometimes the hearth was in the center of the cave, sometimes near the entrance to give warmth and light. They could control the flame, feed it with dry twigs, and even move embers around to start new fires. That's not just survival, that's engineering. And it wasn't just functional. Fire also shaped social life. Imagine a cold, dark evening. A small fire flickers in the cave. Hunters return from a long day tracking reindeer. Someone sharpens a spear. Another cleans a hide. Kids play near the warmth. Adults share stories, maybe about the hunt, maybe about the mammoth that got away. Fire created space for communication, culture, and bonding, something that helped Neanderthals thrive in such a brutal world. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Even though they clearly knew fire, there's debate about whether Neanderthals could create fire themselves from scratch. Some scientists argue they could, using flint stones to spark tinder. Others say they mostly relied on natural fires and carried embers. The truth? Probably a mix. Regardless, they were smart enough to keep it going once they had it, and that's what mattered. Let's talk cooking for a second. Cooking meat wasn't just about taste, it made food digestible and safer. Raw meat is tough, full of bacteria, and takes longer to chew. Cooked meat. Easier, faster, more calories per bite, which is crucial when you're burning energy just staying alive. And it wasn't only meat. Evidence shows they roasted nuts, roots, and tubers, probably to expand their diet during scarce winters. In other words, fire was an ancient kitchen appliance, a prehistoric pressure cooker of survival. And then there's light. Caves are dark. Very dark. Fire gave them the ability to work inside caves, make tools, and even decorate walls. Some archaeologists suggest that fire allowed them to explore creativity, maybe even laying the groundwork for symbolic behavior and art. A flickering flame in a dark cave isn't just survival, it's inspiration. But here's the mind-blowing part. For thousands of generations, Neanderthals survived without fire when they had to. They used their bodies, clothes, shelters, and social skills to keep warm. They adapted. They endured. And when fire came along, they mastered it. Not just for warmth, but for cooking, protection, and community. Fire wasn't magic, it was a tool. But like all great tools, it changed everything. So, Neanderthals managed heat in a frozen world in two ways. 1. Adaptation, thick bodies, warm clothes, smart shelters, and social bonds. 2. Mastery of fire. When it was available, they used it for warmth, cooking, and light. Together, these strategies allowed them to survive winters that would have killed almost any other species. In the next chapter, we'll explore something truly fascinating. The family and social lives of Neanderthals. How did they care for each other? How did they raise their young in a world where a single mistake could be fatal? Because surviving the Ice Age wasn't just about fire or food, it was about community. And that's where Neanderthals really shine. Imagine a bitterly cold morning in Ice Age Europe. Snow covers the ground, glaciers loom in the distance, and a Neanderthal child wakes up in a small cave. The wind howls outside, but inside, warmth and life await. This is the world of Neanderthal families, small, tight-knit, and absolutely dependent on each other. For Neanderthals, survival wasn't just about being strong, it was about being together. They lived in small groups, usually 10 to 30 people, maybe a few families linked by kinship. Why so small? Because in a harsh, frozen world, fewer mouths meant less competition for food, but not too few, because hunting large animals required teamwork. Balance was everything. And teamwork wasn't optional, it was life or death. Hunting a mammoth or a woolly rhino. Everyone had a role. Some drove the animals toward traps, others attacked with spears. Even caring for the young or injured required coordination. This level of cooperation suggests that Neanderthals understood empathy in a very real sense. Evidence shows they cared for the injured. Archaeologists have found individuals who survived severe injuries, broken limbs, tooth loss, even blindness, long enough to suggest someone was helping them. This wasn't just survival instinct, it was compassion. Picture an older Neanderthal, one arm broken, being fed by others in the group. Without that care, they wouldn't have made it. This is community in action. And families weren't just for survival, they were social hubs. Kids needed teaching. They weren't born knowing how to track a reindeer or make a spear. Learning came from observation, mimicry, and maybe even simple instruction. A child might watch an adult sharpen a flint, then try it themselves. Mistakes were part of the process, sometimes painful, sometimes hilarious, if you think about it. Nice try, little one, but that's not how you skin a mammoth. Neanderthal groups probably had strong social bonds, too. We know they buried their dead, sometimes with tools, flowers, or pigments. These burials weren't just practical, they show respect and maybe even ritual. Imagine the group gathering around, placing a loved one carefully in the earth, and marking their memory. It's a small window into their emotional world. Grief, remembrance, perhaps even mourning. Friendship probably existed too. Living in small, dangerous groups, you relied on others for warmth, protection, and food. Those bonds weren't trivial. They were survival. Someone who shared a meal, helped with a hunt, or defended you from predators wasn't just a friend, they were a lifeline. And yes, even in the harshest conditions, there were likely moments of play and joy. Children playing with bones, adults joking while sharpening tools, groups singing or making rhythmic noises by firelight. Laughter may have echoed in caves alongside the howl of the wind outside. Family life also influenced their homes. We've seen evidence of organized living spaces in caves. Some areas were used for sleeping, others for food preparation, others for tool-making. This suggests not just survival but structured social life. Everyone had a place, and everyone had a role. Even in harsh winters, that organization helped them thrive. Neanderthals likely had strong gender and age roles, not in a strict modern sense, but in practical ways. Adults hunted, prepared hides, and maintained shelters. Younger individuals learned skills through observation and practice. Elders may have passed on knowledge of the land, tracking, and survival strategies. This kind of generational knowledge was critical. Without it, a young hunter might wander into a frozen valley unprepared and never come back. And let's not forget communication. Groups needed to coordinate hunts, warn each other of danger, and teach skills. Even without full language, gestures, sounds, and possibly early words kept the group cohesive. Communication wasn't optional, it was survival. Now, imagine a day in the life of a Neanderthal family. Morning, someone checks traps, another gathers wood. Midday, a small hunt or foraging expedition, with kids shadowing adults, learning the ropes. Afternoon, cooking food, repairing tools, teaching the young. Evening, huddled around fire or in shelter, stories, songs, laughter, and rest. Every action, every interaction, reinforced the bonds that kept them alive. Neanderthals weren't just surviving in isolation. They lived in interconnected networks. Groups may have met at hunting grounds or river crossings. They shared knowledge, traded tools or resources, maybe even exchanged mates to prevent inbreeding. This wasn't just biology, it was social sophistication. Their social life extended beyond immediate survival. Decorative shells, pigments, and jewelry suggest identity and status. Even simple ornamentation could indicate age, skill, or achievements. This tells us they weren't just surviving, they were expressing themselves. Art, ritual, play, and teaching all flourished alongside hunting and gathering. So, in the frozen world of Ice Age Europe, the Neanderthal family was the cornerstone of survival. They weren't lone hunters braving the cold. They were groups, communities, networks of care, learning, and cooperation. Strength alone wouldn't have kept them alive. It was empathy, teamwork, and culture that allowed them to endure. Family and friends were more than comfort. They were life insurance. Next, we'll explore Neanderthal intelligence and problem-solving. How did they plan hunts, design tools, and survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth? Because if there's one thing that makes the Neanderthals truly remarkable, it's how clever they were. Not just in surviving the Ice Age, but in mastering it. When we think of Neanderthals, a lot of people imagine big, strong, slightly clumsy humans, grunting and swinging clubs. But that image is way off. Yes, they were strong. Really strong. Like, carry a small bear on your back, strong. But their brains. Also impressive. In some ways, even bigger than ours. And that intelligence. It's what helped them survive hundreds of thousands of years in Ice Age Europe. Let's start with their brain size. Neanderthals had brains as large, or even slightly larger, than modern humans. About 1,450 cubic centimeters on average, compared to our 1,350. That doesn't automatically mean they were smarter, but it does mean they had the hardware to handle complex thought, memory, and problem-solving. One of the most obvious signs of intelligence. Tool-making. We've already talked about Mousterian tools, Levallois flakes, and wooden spears. But consider this, making these tools wasn't random. It required planning, foresight, and precision. You had to picture the final tool in your head, strike the stone carefully, and adjust if it didn't work. That's abstract thinking, imagining something that doesn't yet exist and then creating it. Hunting large animals. More proof of intelligence. Taking down a mammoth or a reindeer isn't a solo effort. It required strategy, communication, and timing. Drive animals into traps, coordinate attacks, and know when to retreat. One wrong move, and your dinner. Neanderthals had to plan hunts days in advance. They studied animal behavior, tracked movements, and anticipated weather. Basically, they were Ice Age tacticians. And it wasn't just hunting. Neanderthals were also engineers. Mammoth bone huts, stone circles, and caves adapted for living show remarkable ingenuity. They manipulated materials to create durable shelters, insulated spaces, and functional living areas. Every home, every hearth, every tool was a testament to their problem-solving abilities. Let's talk about memory for a moment. In a world without written language, memory was survival. They had to remember hunting grounds, seasonal migrations, which plants were edible, where predators lurked, and how to repair tools. That's an incredible mental workload. Forget your phone? Neanderthals didn't have one. They had to remember everything. There's also social intelligence. Living in small groups required understanding others' behavior, intentions, and emotions. They shared food, cared for the sick, and taught the young. All of that means empathy, cooperation, and leadership skills. And don't underestimate creativity. Some Neanderthals used pigments for body decoration or cave art. Others made jewelry from shells, claws, and bones. These weren't random acts, they were expressions of identity, maybe even storytelling. Creativity isn't just about beauty, it's a sign of abstract thought. They weren't just surviving, they were making meaning. Now, here's a fun fact. Neanderthals were also adaptable inventors. Different regions had different challenges. In colder climates, they used heavier clothing, bone tools, and shelters. Near rivers or coasts, they fished, collected shellfish, and made new tools. They didn't have manuals or instructions. They learned by trial, error, and observation. That's pure innovation. And let's not forget teaching and learning. Young Neanderthals weren't born expert hunters or toolmakers. They had to watch, imitate, and practice. Someone probably pointed out, "Not that way, hold it like this," and the next generation learned faster. Teaching, sharing knowledge, and innovation were passed down like a living manual. Some scientists even suggest Neanderthals could plan for the future, not just react to the present. Evidence shows they stored food, carried fire embers, and maintained tools over time. They weren't just surviving day to day, they were preparing for tomorrow. That's forward thinking. That's intelligence. And while they didn't leave written records, they left stories in stone, bone, and cave walls. Every tool, every home, every burial tells us about a life lived with intelligence, foresight, and care. Even their artifacts suggest problem-solving combined with creativity, which is a hallmark of true intelligence. So, when you imagine a Neanderthal, don't picture a brute. Picture someone strategizing a hunt, crafting tools, teaching children, decorating their world, and adapting to an Ice Age environment that would make most humans freeze in place. Brains and brawn worked together. Strength kept them alive in the moment. Intelligence kept them alive for generations. Even today, studying their ingenuity teaches us something. Survival isn't just about muscle or fire. It's about thinking ahead, solving problems, and working together. Neanderthals had all of that in spades. In the next chapter, we'll explore Neanderthal art, symbols, and culture. Because intelligence isn't just about tools or survival. It's about expressing yourself, leaving a mark, and connecting with others. And Neanderthals? They may have been more human than we ever imagined. When most people think of prehistoric art, they picture early humans, Homo sapiens, painting majestic bison or hand stencils on cave walls. But here's a plot twist. Neanderthals might have been artists too. And before you roll your eyes, no, it wasn't a stick figure of a mammoth saying, "Hi." It was real symbolism, real expression, in the harshest conditions imaginable. Let's set the scene. A cold, dark cave in Ice Age Europe. A flicker of light from embers illuminates a rough stone wall. A Neanderthal holds a piece of red ochre, powdered mineral that will become paint. With careful strokes, they mark the wall. Why? We don't know for sure. Maybe it was decoration. Maybe it was ritual. Maybe it was storytelling. Whatever it was intentional. Evidence of Neanderthal art is relatively rare, but striking. Some caves in Spain, like La Pasiega and Maltreviso, show hand stencils, geometric shapes, and ochre markings that predate modern human occupation. Dating shows Neanderthals made them at least 64,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens arrived in the area. That means they weren't copying anyone. They were original artists, expressing themselves on stone canvases. Now, why art? We tend to think of art as luxury. But for Neanderthals, it might have served practical and emotional purposes. One idea: symbolic communication. Imagine using shapes, colors, or handprints to convey information, like, "This is our territory," or "The hunt was successful here." Another possibility: ritual and spirituality. Art may have helped them process life, death, and the natural world, even without words. It's fascinating because it shows they weren't just reacting to the environment. They were reflecting on it. And it wasn't just cave walls. Neanderthals also made decorative objects: pierced shells, claw necklaces, and engraved bones. Some even show signs of pigment use, coloring shells red or yellow. Wearing these items might have been about identity, status, or social signaling, like prehistoric fashion. Imagine a group of Neanderthals walking along a frozen valley, decorated with shells or claws. It's not just survival anymore, it's expression. Interestingly, some patterns are geometric, not representational. Lines, dots, and crosshatches appear on walls and objects. That might seem simple to us, but it requires abstract thought, the ability to represent ideas symbolically rather than literally. And abstract thought. That's a huge sign of intelligence. It shows that Neanderthals could conceptualize ideas that didn't exist in front of them. Let's talk color for a second. Red ochre pops up a lot. Why red? Psychologists today link red with emotion, danger, life, passion. Maybe it had similar meaning back then. Other colors, yellow, black, and white, were used too. They might have been creating visual contrast, drawing attention to certain areas or objects. Even in the freezing darkness, they understood aesthetics, or at least, effectiveness in communication. Some researchers suggest Neanderthal art also had a social function. Imagine a small group in a cave during winter. You're stuck inside for weeks. You paint walls, decorate objects, maybe mark a handprint. It's not just for you, it's a shared activity, a bonding ritual. Art might have strengthened group cohesion, reminding everyone they were part of a team, a family, a community. And here's the kicker: some evidence hints at music or rhythm alongside visual art. Bone flutes, shell instruments, and stone percussion tools suggest they might have created simple melodies. Combine that with cave art, and you have a multisensory cultural experience. A Neanderthal cave wasn't just a shelter, it was a stage, a studio, and a gathering place. Now, it's important to temper this with reality. Neanderthal art wasn't as widespread or as complex as later Homo sapiens art. It wasn't Cave Sistine Chapel level. But that doesn't make it less remarkable. Creating any symbolic mark in the Ice Age, while freezing, hunting for survival and carrying food, is nothing short of extraordinary. And let's imagine what it felt like. A flicker of firelight illuminates your hand on a cave wall. You press ochre, see the color transfer to stone. It's permanent. It's your mark. Somewhere, a fellow Neanderthal nods or adds their own mark. You're leaving a trace of existence. A signature in a world that can erase you in a single winter. That's powerful. So what does this tell us? Neanderthals weren't just strong, resilient hunters. They were thinking, reflecting, and expressing beings. They had culture, creativity, and possibly even a sense of identity. Art and symbolism weren't just decoration. They were part of what made life meaningful in a harsh, frozen world. In the next chapter, we'll explore the Neanderthal diet and cooking practices, how they turned the brutal environment into a sustainable source of food, and how clever hunting, cooking, and foraging strategies kept them alive for hundreds of thousands of years. Because survival isn't just brains or fire, it's food and how you get it. When it comes to survival, nothing is more basic or more critical than food. And in the Ice Age, finding it wasn't easy. For Neanderthals, every meal was a battle against cold, hunger, and scarce resources. Some days, they feasted. Other days, they hunted, foraged, and hoped. It was feast or famine. Literally. Let's start with the obvious. Meat. Neanderthals were hunters. Big hunters. Reindeer, mammoths, woolly rhinos, bison. They went after anything that could feed the group. And they didn't just chase prey randomly. They planned, stalked, and ambushed. They used tools, fire, and teamwork to bring down animals much larger than themselves. Imagine a group of hunters working together to corner a woolly rhino, spears ready, breath steaming in the cold air. One wrong move. Game over. One right move. Enough meat to feed the group for days. But it wasn't all about brute force. Neanderthals were clever foragers, too. They knew which plants, nuts, roots, and berries were edible. Some sites show evidence of mushrooms, tubers, and even moss being eaten, which might surprise you, given the stereotype of Neanderthals as meat-obsessed. In coastal areas, they might have fished or collected shellfish. So their diet wasn't just meat, it was balanced and adapted to their environment. Cooking was a game changer. Raw meat is tough and takes a long time to chew. Cooked meat. Easier to digest, safer to eat, and higher in calories per bite. Neanderthals used fire to roast meat, boil roots, and maybe even smoke food for storage. Even the bones weren't wasted. Cracked open, they provided marrow, a calorie-rich, fat-packed treat. Marrow might have been one of the key reasons they could survive harsh winters with minimal plant foods. Here's an interesting point. Neanderthals weren't picky eaters. They ate what they could. Some evidence even shows cannibalism in extreme cases, not because they liked it, but because survival sometimes demands desperate measures. Feast or famine, remember? And they weren't just eating randomly. Their diets varied by region and season. In Northern Europe, ice and snow limited plants, so they relied more on meat and fat. In warmer areas, wild fruits, nuts, and vegetables supplemented their meals. This flexibility was key to survival. The ability to eat whatever was available made them resilient in a world that could change overnight. Cooking wasn't just about food, it was strategic survival. Boiling, roasting, smoking, or even just heating food could make it last longer. Carrying embers from one camp to another? That wasn't just for warmth, it was for cooking. Neanderthals also planned for scarcity. They stored meat, bones, and maybe even plant foods for later consumption. This shows foresight, not just living day to day, but preparing for tough times. Let's talk about nutrition and health. A diet rich in meat gave them protein and fat, essential for surviving cold winters. Plants added vitamins and minerals, helping prevent deficiencies. Evidence shows that Neanderthals were healthy and strong. Their skeletons bear few signs of malnutrition, despite the harsh environment. Sure, they had injuries, broken bones, and dental wear. But overall, their diet worked. And here's a fun detail: they may have flavored food. Pigments like ochre or ashes found in cooking areas suggest early seasoning or preservation. Maybe not gourmet meals, but even small innovations like this show they were experimenting with food. Neanderthal meals were social events too. Hunters returned with meat, gatherers brought plants, and the group prepared food together. Cooking wasn't just survival, it was social bonding. Around the fire, they shared food, stories, and perhaps even jokes. Even in the freezing Ice Age, meal times created warmth beyond the fire itself. And let's not forget child nutrition. Young Neanderthals needed high-calorie food to grow strong in the cold. Adults shared meat, marrow, and cooked foods to ensure the next generation survived. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was an investment in the group's future. So, Neanderthal diet wasn't simple. It was adaptable, strategic, and communal. It balanced meat and plants, used fire cleverly, and prepared for scarcity. It kept them alive for hundreds of thousands of years in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. In many ways, food shaped Neanderthal life. Every hunt, every foraging trip, every meal around the fire was tied to family, survival, and community. It influenced where they lived, how they hunted, and how they interacted. Because surviving Ice Age winters wasn't just about strength, it was about intelligence, strategy, and cooperation. In the next chapter, we'll explore Neanderthal death, burial practices, and rituals. Because their understanding of life didn't end with survival. They thought about mortality, cared for their dead, and left traces that still speak to us today. The way Neanderthals approached death reveals a side of them that's deeply human, thoughtful, emotional, and surprisingly sophisticated. Death in the Ice Age was never far away. Predators, cold, starvation, injury, it was always lurking. For the Neanderthals, survival was a daily challenge. But even amidst the struggle to stay alive, they seemed to understand that life ends. And they responded in ways that reveal a deeply human side. Let's start with burial practices. Archaeologists have uncovered Neanderthal graves, not random pits, but carefully prepared sites. Bodies were sometimes placed in a flexed position, limbs folded, as if in a gentle, respectful sleep. Some graves include grave goods, animal bones, tools, and pigments. Why? We can't be 100% sure, but it suggests ritual, remembrance, and maybe belief in something beyond death. Imagine a small group placing a loved one into the earth, carefully arranging objects, marking their presence. Even without written language, this is a clear message: we see you. You mattered. Some burials also show evidence of pigments like ochre. Red ochre might have symbolized blood, life, or vitality. Sprinkling it on the dead could have been a way to honor the person, or maybe a ritual meant to help them in some unknown afterlife. It's fascinating because it shows Neanderthals weren't just practical survivors, they were reflective beings. Neanderthals also seem to have cared for the dying. Skeletons of individuals with severe injuries or illnesses show survival for months or even years with help from others. An older adult with a broken leg, or someone with teeth worn down to the gums, wouldn't survive alone. The group fed them, protected them, and made sure they lived as long as possible. This isn't just survival, it's empathy. And care extended to infants and children. Child skeletons with signs of developmental issues or injury indicate that young Neanderthals received long-term care. It wasn't just a matter of teaching hunting or foraging, it was nurturing life itself. In a world where a single mistake could be fatal, this level of care is extraordinary. Some researchers suggest that Neanderthals might have practiced symbolic rituals around death. It's possible they marked graves with stones, decorated the area with pigments, or performed small ceremonies. Even if we can't know exactly what they thought, the act itself indicates awareness and intentionality. Death wasn't ignored. It was acknowledged, respected, and woven into social life. Now, here's an intriguing possibility: commemoration through artifacts. Neanderthals sometimes left tools, shells, or animal bones alongside graves. These objects may have had practical uses, symbolic meanings, or both. Perhaps a tool represented the person's skill, or a shell symbolized a connection to nature. Even in a harsh, frozen world, they found ways to give life meaning. And death wasn't just an individual event, it affected the whole group. Losing a hunter or caregiver meant the group had to reorganize survival strategies. Hunting, food distribution, and protection all had to adapt. Grieving wasn't just emotional, it was functional, too. But Neanderthals seemed to combine both aspects, practical and emotional, in ways that resemble human society today. Some burials suggest long-term attachment to specific locations. Caves were often reused, not just as homes, but as sacred spaces. Returning to the same cave to bury the dead could indicate a sense of place and continuity, an early form of territory and memory. Even in the Ice Age, Neanderthals created a sense of permanence in a transient world. Interestingly, some burials show group cooperation in rituals. Imagine a family or group carefully preparing a body, arranging items, maybe even marking a site with stones. Everyone contributes in some way. It's social, emotional, and symbolic, a ritual that binds the living together while honoring the dead. Even without language, gestures, and shared understanding created a shared cultural experience. We also see evidence that Neanderthals may have reused sites over generations. Multiple burials in the same cave suggest repeated ritual activity. Perhaps they returned to mark the passing of others, or to maintain the sacredness of the site. This shows memory, tradition, and continuity, hallmarks of culture. And here's a humbling thought. All of these actions, burial, care for the injured, ritual marking, happened in a world where every day was a struggle to survive. Yet Neanderthals still made time to acknowledge life, death, and community. It's a reminder that culture, empathy, and reflection are not exclusive to modern humans. So, in the frozen world of the Ice Age, Neanderthals dealt with mortality in deeply human ways. They cared for the living and dying. They buried their dead with intention. They marked their presence through symbols, tools, and pigments. They created rituals that strengthened the social fabric. Death wasn't ignored. It was part of life, observed, respected, and woven into the story of the group. In the next chapter, we'll explore Neanderthal extinction, why this resilient, intelligent, and socially complex species disappeared, and what their story can teach us about survival, adaptation, and humanity itself. because understanding how Neanderthals ended gives us insight into what it really means to survive and to thrive. Imagine standing on a frozen European plain tens of thousands of years ago. The wind bites your face, snow drifts over the ground, and the cold is relentless. For tens of thousands of years, Neanderthals thrived in this world. Strong, smart, creative, and resourceful, they survived winters that would have killed almost any other species. Yet, eventually they disappeared. The last Neanderthals vanished around 40,000 years ago. So, what happened? How did such a successful species vanish? Let's start with climate change. The Ice Age wasn't a single, unchanging freeze. It was full of fluctuations, warmer periods followed by bitter cold snaps. Vegetation changed. Herds of prey migrated. Resources shifted unpredictably. Neanderthals were adaptable, but rapid environmental changes put pressure on their survival strategies. Food sources became scarce. Traditional hunting grounds vanished. Even the cleverest hunter struggles when the landscape changes overnight. Next, competition with modern humans, Homo sapiens. When our ancestors arrived in Europe, they brought new hunting strategies, technologies, and social structures. They made more sophisticated tools, used long-range weapons, and had larger, interconnected social groups. Neanderthals weren't inferior, they were just facing a new type of competitor. And competition for food, shelter, and territory became intense. Interbreeding also played a role. Modern humans and Neanderthals didn't just compete, they mated. Some Neanderthal genes survive in humans today, especially outside Africa. This genetic blending may have contributed to their disappearance as a distinct species. In a sense, Neanderthals didn't vanish entirely, they live on in us. Let's not forget disease. New species moving into an area bring new pathogens. Neanderthals, isolated for hundreds of thousands of years, may have had little immunity. Even a mild illness could decimate small groups. In combination with climate stress and competition, disease might have pushed populations to the brink. But it wasn't all catastrophic. Neanderthals survived hundreds of thousands of years in Ice Age Europe. That's resilience on a level we rarely appreciate. They endured cold, famine, predators, and environmental upheaval, and thrived. Their extinction wasn't sudden. It was a gradual fading, a slow squeeze from multiple pressures. Some scientists suggest population size played a crucial role. Neanderthals lived in small groups, often isolated from each other. Small populations are vulnerable to chance events. A bad winter, a failed hunt, or a disease outbreak could wipe out a group. Even brilliant problem-solving can't always overcome numbers. And yet, for every challenge, Neanderthals adapted. They invented tools. They controlled fire. They cared for the sick. They made art and jewelry. They raised children, buried their dead, and communicated complex ideas. Every adaptation bought them more time, more winters survived. They were survivors, not just victims. But humans brought a new set of pressures. Faster hunting techniques, more sophisticated social networks, and larger population sizes made Homo sapiens a formidable competitor. The Neanderthal lifestyle, once perfectly adapted to Ice Age Europe, couldn't keep up indefinitely. Interestingly, Neanderthals weren't primitive. They had culture, language, art, and technology. They weren't slow, stupid, or clumsy. They were clever, creative, and remarkably human, just not modern human. And that's what makes their story bittersweet. So, what can we learn from their extinction? Adaptation is essential, but it has limits. Intelligence, strength, and culture help, but external pressures, climate, competition, disease, can overwhelm even the most resilient species. It's a lesson that resonates today. Survival isn't just about personal skill or ingenuity. It's about environment, community, and timing. And yet, Neanderthals weren't gone forever. Their legacy lives on in modern humans, in our genes, perhaps in our behaviors, and certainly in what we've learned from studying them. When we explore caves, analyze tools, and trace their DNA, we are connecting with a species that endured far longer than most could imagine. In the end, the last Neanderthals weren't failures. They survived an ice age, created culture, innovated, and cared for each other in ways that rival modern humans. They disappeared as a species, yes, but their story isn't lost. It's written in stone, bone, pigment, and DNA. In the next and final chapter, we'll look at what the Neanderthals teach us about survival, resilience, and humanity itself. Because the story of the Neanderthals isn't just about who they were, it's about what they reveal to us about ourselves, and how life persists in the harshest conditions imaginable. After hundreds of thousands of years, countless winters, and challenges most of us can't even imagine, the Neanderthals survived. Not perfectly, not always easily, but they survived longer than almost any other species in Ice Age Europe. And in their story, there are lessons that reach across time, lessons about resilience, intelligence, and humanity itself. First, adaptation matters. Neanderthals thrived in a world that would have frozen most humans in place. They evolved thick, muscular bodies to conserve heat. They created clothing from animal hides, built shelters, and carried fire. They ate what the land offered and planned for scarcity. Adaptation wasn't just biological. It was cultural, technological, and social. For us today, in a world that's rapidly changing, climate, technology, society, the Neanderthal story reminds us, flexibility and innovation are key to survival. Next, community is everything. They cared for the young, the injured, and the elderly. They shared food, knowledge, and protection. They buried their dead with ritual and respect. Strength alone doesn't keep a species alive. Cooperation, empathy, and social bonds do. Even in harsh conditions, humans thrive when they work together. Neanderthals show us that survival is rarely solo work. Problem-solving and ingenuity are crucial. They crafted complex tools, planned large hunts, and manipulated fire for warmth, cooking, and safety. They created art, decorated objects, and possibly made music. All of these innovations required foresight and creativity. Neanderthals teach us that intelligence isn't just survival skill. It's the ability to imagine, create, and plan for tomorrow. Another lesson is about embracing limitations while maximizing strengths. Neanderthals weren't the fastest or the tallest, but they used what they had wisely. Muscular bodies for endurance, brains for strategy, culture for cohesion. We too can learn to leverage our strengths, adapt to weaknesses, and make the most of what we have, just like they did. And yes, resilience matters more than perfection. They weren't flawless. They lost hunts. They faced starvation. They suffered injuries. But they endured for hundreds of thousands of years. Resilience isn't about never failing. It's about persisting, adapting, and continuing, and that's exactly what Neanderthals did. Let's not forget the humanity in Neanderthals. They were empathetic, social, creative, and reflective. They mourned their dead, cared for the sick, and expressed themselves through art and adornment. They remind us that humanity isn't about being Homo sapiens. It's about connection, intelligence, and culture, even in the harshest conditions. Their story also reminds us about mortality and legacy. The last Neanderthals disappeared, but not entirely. Fragments of their DNA live on in modern humans. Their innovations, art, and survival strategies continue to teach us. We carry a part of them forward, just as they carried fire, tools, and knowledge forward in the Ice Age. So, what can we take from 400,000 years of Neanderthal survival? Adapt and innovate. Survival isn't just strength, it's flexibility and creativity. Work together. Cooperation and empathy can outlast raw power. Plan and prepare. Foresight and problem-solving matter more than luck. Resilience is key. Failure isn't fatal. Persistence is. Leave a mark. Whether in culture, tools, or relationships, legacy matters. In short, they weren't just surviving winters without reliable fire. They were living, creating, and thriving in a way that still resonates today. Imagine a Neanderthal cave. Children playing near a hearth, adults repairing tools, a hunter returning with meat, someone painting a wall with ochre. It's a world full of struggle, but also full of ingenuity, care, and expression. It's cold, yes, but it's alive. And in that life, there are lessons for all of us. So, when we think of survival, don't just think of strength or fire. Think of brains, hearts, and community. Think of creativity in the face of scarcity. Think of courage in the face of impossible winters. Neanderthals endured 400,000 years of challenges that would break most species. And in doing so, they left us a story that is both cautionary and inspiring. They remind us that survival is about more than fighting the cold. It's about connection, intelligence, culture, and resilience. Next time you sit by a fire, cook a meal, or share a story with loved ones, remember, you're doing what Neanderthals did, creating warmth, sharing knowledge, and sustaining life. Except you get central heating and instant coffee. Lucky you. And that's the story of the Neanderthals, strong, clever, empathetic, and resilient. A species that endured frozen landscapes, mastered fire, built communities, and left a legacy that lives on in us. They survived 400,000 winters without reliable fire, but they taught us that the true warmth comes from ingenuity, connection, and resilience. And in that, we are all their inheritors. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the Ice Age and the life of the Neanderthals. If you enjoyed drifting through history with me tonight, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss a bedtime story from the History Vault. And hey, why not like this video if you learned something new, or drop a comment telling me which part of Neanderthal life amazed you the most. I love reading your thoughts. Check out these other videos, point to video thumbnails, for more incredible stories from history. And remember, the past is full of surprises, just waiting to lull you into wonder. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next story.